I'm Sarah-Jane Mee, and this is the Sky News Daily. Gaza's largest hospital is now a death zone, according to the World Health Organization. It's said there was a mass grave at the entrance to Al-Shifa hospital and a desperate situation inside. Israel has produced its most convincing evidence yet of Hamas military activity there. But so far, it hasn't proved its claims that there was a secret command centre and a complicated web of tunnels underneath. And that's why, on this episode, we won't just hear about what's been happening at the hospital. We'll also explain how we at Sky News go about analysing and trying to verify the claims made by both sides in this conflict.
In terms of the actual evidence that they've shown us so far, and again, it's only what the IDF have told us and nothing independent, is one tunnel, one hole, a shaft that goes down, and a tunnel that's around 50-odd metres long.
We'll also hear about the premature babies who were evacuated from the hospital and have now arrived in Egypt for treatment. Let's start with news on the babies, because International Affairs editor Dominic Waghorn is with us on the podcast today. Dominic, most of the seriously ill babies from Gaza's Al-Shifa hospital have now crossed the border into Egypt. What more can you tell us about their situation?
The latest is that, and we're hearing from our team on the ground in Gaza, that these babies have got now to Al-Arish, that is the capital of the Sinai province of Egypt. We're told by the World Health Organization they are premature, they are malnourished, some of them severely in need of urgent medical intervention. So their journey has ended there, but it began obviously in Al-Shifa hospital. And we first saw these babies over a week ago when Palestinian doctors in Al-Shifa, Gaza's largest hospital, said that they were running out of fuel and they were having to switch off incubators. We saw those very dramatic, rather harrowing pictures of babies, very small little babies, just a few weeks old, born after the beginning of this war, around 30 of them taken out of incubators and then put on a bed, all put together, so their bodies can keep themselves warm, as the doctors there said. The Israelis said that it was a stunt, a cynical stunt by the Hamas-controlled Gaza health ministry. So these babies have been at the centre of a war, but also an information war. And then when the Israelis moved in on the hospital, the Israelis said they were bringing in incubators, and the World Health Organization went in overnight and said that these babies urgently needed care and intervention. In the last few hours, they have been transferred by ambulance to Al-Arish Hospital. And the pictures of them being transferred in incubators from one ambulance to another are just extraordinary. I mean, we've never seen anything like this really in the Middle East, which has seen all kinds of conflicts. But for almost 30 premature babies to be transferred by incubators right in the middle of a war is extraordinary. The latest we have is that they're in Al-Arish. They're in good care there, we're told, and hopefully are getting all the help that they need.
Yeah, those babies have come to symbolise so much in this war. We will follow their progress as best we can. But Dominic, that's just a small number of patients that were in that hospital. What do we know about what's happened to the others who had to leave what was once Gaza's largest hospital?
The World Health Organization, when it went in, briefly described the hospital as a death zone, not just because there's a mass grave outside the hospital where up to 80 bodies were buried because the refrigerators in the morgue could not be powered, but also because the hospital had been overwhelmed by just the sheer number of casualties because of Israel's military campaign in northern Gaza. And then as the World Health Organization went into the hospital itself, they found staff and patients terrified, pleading for evacuation. What they've said is that there were around 300 patients left, hundreds of patients evacuated over the last few days. Those last few hundred patients are the most desperately vulnerable. They are either patients on dialysis machines, or they are largely the victims of the war, amputees or victims of severe trauma. At the moment, we don't really know what's happened to them. They don't seem to have been evacuated out of the hospital, so they are effectively in the care of the Israeli military who are occupying the hospital.
How are the Israelis justifying the attack on Al-Shifa hospital? Because the laws of war give special protection to hospitals. It's worth reminding listeners what the official line is from Israel on this.
It is a war crime to raid or move in on or to include a hospital as part of your military action. But there is an exemption to that. If you believe that a hospital or a medical facility is being used as a military base or as a military threat to your own forces, you are then allowed to move in on the hospital, even if there are patients inside it. Now, what the Israelis have said for weeks now is that Al-Shifa is not just a hospital, but is basically the cover of Hamas's command and control operation. At the beginning of the war, they produced a 3D virtual simulation, an illustration, they said, of what they believed lurked below Al-Shifa. And this illustration showed a multi-story subterranean secret terror complex, as they put it. And that's why they felt they had to go into the hospital. They also believed hostages had been taken there after October the 7th. Now, initially, they were unable to prove much of those claims. But in the last 24 hours, they have begun to find, they believe, the beginnings of that complex. Now, all it is a sort of deep shaft sunk into the ground within the hospital grounds, not actually below a hospital building. And they've also produced CCTV footage they found on the cameras of the hospital inside, which they say were taken on the night of the October the 7th attacks, that show what they say were two hostages separately being led, one very wounded on a stretcher, the other one being sort of forced at gunpoint through the corridors of the hospital. There's still a dispute about whether they were hostages. Certainly at least one of them looks like a wounded man, but it's hard to tell, to independently verify whether he was a hostage. But what is clear from those pictures is that you had gunmen in the hospital. You have to bear in mind that all the doctors and officials we've spoken to have denied any claims that there were men with guns inside the hospital or that Hamas was using it as a hospital. That's one point that the Israelis have made. They're trying to prove that Hamas was using the hospital as a military base, and they are now putting together evidence to prove that. But against that, you have to say, I think they're being weighed against this fact. They have knocked out Gaza's biggest hospital at a time when the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is going from bad to worse. The UN warning about starvation, others warning about the risk of a mass outbreak of disease. What they have to prove is that their intervention in Shifa, that going in with tanks and troops, was justified. They claim that one of their soldiers, whose body has recently been recovered, Noah Marciano, was executed there. They haven't produced any evidence to prove that, but that's certainly their claim. And therefore, they're saying they were justified to go into the hospital.
We've seen the United States, Dominic, one of Israel's closest allies, of course, call for more pauses for humanitarian aid to get into Gaza. Are the Israelis listening?
Joe Biden has personally requested a humanitarian pause, and the Israelis have been under enormous pressure to pause their fighting. They have said, the Israelis, that instead of bringing in a large-scale humanitarian mission behind their troops, which many people would say they need to, they have a duty to do under the laws of war, they are bringing in some aid, as they brought incubators and baby food and other supplies to Al-Shifa. But they're largely saying that it's up to international organisations like the World Health Organization, the UN, to sort of take the strain in a humanitarian sense from what they're doing in this war. So what those organisations are saying, though, is that a little bit of aid that Israel's bringing in, fuel and baby food and supplies, doesn't even touch the size in terms of what Gaza needs. What Gaza needs is a pause in the fighting for several days to let enough aid in to those who need it. The Americans and others are saying it needs to happen. So far, the Israelis have said they don't feel they can do that because their campaign is needed to deal with the threat Hamas poses to their population, and they feel like they are achieving their goals in a military sense.
Israel is hoping that there could be a hostage deal in the next few days. Around 240 people, of course, seized by Hamas on October the 7th. That looks like being the key point in this conflict. What are you hearing about how close some kind of deal is?
And so what we've heard from both the Qataris and also the Israelis over the last 24 hours is that they are increasingly confident a deal is in the offing. What they seem to be focusing on in their negotiations now is the plight of the women and children that Hamas took and other Palestinian factions on October the 7th. And the plan, it seems to be, is for them to be exchanged for a number of Palestinian women and children being held by Israelis in their jails. Now, there's a difference of opinion over the numbers involved. The Israelis seem to think there are 70 women and children inside Gaza that need to be got out. That Hamas and other Palestinians have said they can only account for around 50. So that's clearly one sticking point. The other one is Hamas seems to be saying to the Qataris that logistically it's hard to work out exactly where the hostages are. They're not holding all of them. And they need to work out exactly where they are and then get them to a place where they can be exchanged. What's also complicating matters, it seems, is on the Israeli side, there are divisions, reportedly at least in the Israeli media, between those on the hawkish end of the debate here, saying that this is not the moment to give the enemy a break. If you give them 5 days ceasefire, Hamas can regroup. And therefore, there's a reluctance among some on the Israeli side to go ahead with an exchange that would involve a ceasefire that would last a number of days. On the other hand, Israelis are saying, no, this is an opportunity to get at least the women and children out that must be seized. So I think it's fair to say that there is progress being made towards some kind of deal, but we're not there yet.
Our international affairs editor, Dominic Waghorn, thank you. We're taking a short break, and when we're back, we'll be looking at how Sky News verifies the footage released by both the Israelis and Hamas. Well, Adam Parker is from our data and forensics team. His job is to verify the video and pictures coming into Sky News from both the IDF and Hamas. So, Adam, let's start with the information you've got so far. What have you got to work with at the moment?
2 or 3 times a day, we're seeing the IDF release still images, videos. Sometimes we see them on Telegram, on Twitter, on the IDF website. Interestingly, when they send us still images, they actually send them via WhatsApp. So it's got a kind of WhatsApp time code. And it's normally filmed by phones. We do sometimes see slightly higher production value stuff released by the IDF. And in terms of the other side, in terms of Hamas and what they're releasing, almost everything they release is polished, but it's slow. And it's probably about 1/10 what we see from the IDF. And then the other side of it is UGC, user-generated content, which right now we're seeing almost nothing. That lack of UGC makes our jobs very hard because we would typically use that relatively independent view to be able to piece it together and work out what's going on. So anything that is put out by the IDF or Hamas, we have to look at and we have to break it down, and they're only showing us what they want to show us. So a couple of weeks ago, we were trying to work out where they may be in Gaza, how far they've got, how close to Gaza City they are. And they would, the bits where they didn't want us to see, it was very tight, a tiny little street, and you very, very hard. And somebody just spots in the corner of that building, oh, it's there. And actually that allows us to update our maps, update exactly where we know that they are. Hamas-wise, they're very, very hard to work out.
How do you verify this? You've gone through some of the points there where you sort of determine location, but obviously you have to verify what's going on, and there are a number of stages to this because obviously what we want to bring viewers, we have to be spot on.
The first thing we look at is location, actually, because knowing where it is will allow us to give that context. I mean, the weather gives us a good idea. We sometimes can see the sun. What position is the sun in? Is that telling us it's the morning, the afternoon? Has there been no sun at all for the last 2 days, and has it been cloudy? So the weather is one of those things. Typically, we would try and question the person who filmed it and get to them. I mean, this is the complete barrier that we do not have. So, yeah, I would say firstly, location, and then secondly, what else can we see? What conditions can we see? And trying to kind of corroborate that and try and pull it together with other bits of data that we have. We do have satellite data and other things which actually is becoming more restricted. A lot of the satellite providers that would send us images daily of a certain place are now limiting that. So we are having to jump over and be very careful with what we're saying when we say we cannot independently verify this. That does mean that we are presenting it as the IDF have put this out. What can we tell you about it? Well, we know it's here. We know it's probably filmed on the morning of that day, and almost let viewers decide.
Let's talk about the latest footage from over the weekend, and it is of the Al-Shifa hospital, and what everyone is talking about, the IDF saying that there's a network of tunnels under that hospital. They say they had some evidence before they went in there. It's now up to them to gather more. And we have seen some video come out of what appears to be a tunnel. Where did you start with this video? We
first got any evidence of a tunnel released on Friday. So this was very much a hole in the ground, and you couldn't see very much, but they did actually pan up and show you kind of where it was in relation to other hospital buildings. So we can tell that it's on the edge of the hospital grounds. Yesterday, they released another video and didn't make it that clear that it was the same tunnel, but we've managed to work out today that it is an identical tunnel. They've managed to put a drone and some other GoPro kind of style camera down there and given us kind of the first glimpse of the inside of what they claim is a Hamas tunnel. They say it's around about 50 metres long from that location on the kind of edge of the hospital grounds. That would put it under some of the main hospital buildings. There's a door. As we know, these things don't just get filmed and then get put up a minute later. So I suspect they're going to be trying to show us more evidence, because a couple of weeks ago they put out a very snazzy graphic video that they created showing Al-Shifa Hospital and showing what was underneath it, they thought, and it showed a network of tunnels and everything. But in terms of the actual evidence that they've shown us so far, and again, it's only what the IDF have told us and nothing independent, is one tunnel, one hole, a shaft that goes down, and a tunnel that's around 50 odd metres long.
So that's what we know about what the IDF are claiming so far, and from what you've gleaned from this video about what we know about this tunnel. How do you then verify that in terms of what information is out there about the Hamas tunnel network? Who do you talk to about that to try and verify that this is actually what the IDF is saying it is? So
we've looked at previous tunnels, and actually we're speaking to experts later today who are hopefully going to give us a sense. Really all we can do without speaking to experts in tunnelling and systems and engineers who would be able to give us that info is almost do a compare and contrast. Like, could this be a Hamas tunnel in terms of the way its shape, its length, its width? If it was a previous tunnel being used, and actually the IDF haven't necessarily said this was a dugout tunnel by Hamas. They say it was a tunnel used by them. So we don't actually know if the door that we see at the end of this video actually leads to a wider network. You would think, if they'd got there and filmed it, that they would have gone down by now and shown us that, and shown us, and maybe we would expect to see a slightly different type of tunnel if it is part of the infrastructure of the hospital.
What more information do you need to verify IDF claims like this?
We need to be there ourselves. Yeah, we need to be there. We need to be. We know there was a couple of journalism teams there that managed to get a view of the top of the shaft of the tunnel, and that was exceptionally limited. We had no. We really need to get in ourselves. We've been trying to today. We know the tunnel goes exactly where it goes down, trying to work out where that actually leads. But the videos that we've been sent swirl around so many times as they're trying to get down to the bottom, because it's a stairway, that we don't know which direction that tunnel actually goes, whether it does go towards a hospital building or potentially away from them.
Okay, Adam, been really interesting to chat to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
My thanks to Dom Waghorn and Adam Parker. We'll see you next time.